In the countdown to the US election, you probably think you've seen the worst of AI-generated videos and fake news.
Somebody else generated them. I didn't generate them.
But there is a place that's been battling the worst disinformation for over a decade. It's not the United States, it's Taiwan.
That everybody thinks about is tweets and Facebook posts when they think of disinformation. But in Taiwan, it's so much deeper than that.
There's just been the recent fake news targeted at Kamala Harris.
They managed to verify that one of the deepfakes was traced back to Russia, flooding the zone. It's a technique that was invented by the Soviets in the 70s and 80s.
So it's hard to know the truth or reality.
These things, they start somewhere on the internet and they start spinning up and spinning up and spinning up to become this big whirlwind of nobody being able to buy toilet paper in the US and around the world.
Alex and Jonah, you're the guys behind Broken News, which is a series about how Taiwan is the target of disinformation from China.
I'm Alex. I'm from the UK and I'm the writer, director, editor of this show.
Okay, Jonah?
I'm Jonah, last name Khvat. I'm a producer. I'm a freelance journalist based in Taiwan.
So, Alex, before we get into Broken News, let's start off with the US election. So there's just been the recent news, well, fake news targeted at Kamala Harris. What do you make of that?
It was the Microsoft Threat Analysis Center. They do some very good work in the US with detecting fake news, disinformation, and they managed to verify that one of the deepfakes, which came out around Kamala Harris, her making some false claims, some incendiary claims, was traced back to Russia. Now, obviously, this is just part of a very, very ongoing long-term trend of autocracies like Russia and China increasingly using disinformation as a tactic to interrupt democratic processes around the world, especially in major Western democracies like the US, the UK, and France and Germany to a lesser extent. But probably we'll see it ramping up as we get towards the election. I think AI is just really increasing the threat level that comes along with this whole disinformation tactic that's being used to weaken democratic societies, weaken institutions, and sow discord and create mistrust.
Yeah, it's a fascinating movement that we're kind of observing at the moment. We hear a lot about Russia in terms of the US and the US election, but what do you think is China's role?
In the US election? So the interesting thing about China is that they do have an extremely developed advanced information warfare department. It's one of the biggest and most well-funded in the world, but they don't really target it anywhere outside of Taiwan. So Taiwan is by far their biggest target. Most of the force of their disinformation operations, their click farms, their troll farms, is directed against Taiwan. Now, they do run some operations against the US, but what people have seen over the last few years is that they're less, I don't know if the word's advanced, they're less sophisticated than the Russian efforts because they tend to use talking points that would be more applicable to people in China. So they tend to talk about the value of Chinese-style democracy and all this kind of stuff. So they're trying to promote themselves in a propagandistic way in the US rather than directly sowing disinformation and trying to create this polarization, which is what Russia does so effectively. And also Iran. I think Iran is often overlooked as the other major player in this information space. If you're talking about attacks against the US, Russia is far and away the biggest threat actor. Number two is Iran, and number three is China, because China has this huge apparatus, but it's all pretty much all focused on Taiwan so far.
Right, and Jonah, that is, as we said, all targeted on Taiwan, but they are also learning, isn't it, from Taiwan, the Chinese, and they're becoming a lot more sophisticated in the strategies. How would you say that Taiwan is a kind of testing ground for Beijing when it wants to actually target democracies?
Yeah, I remember one of the interviewees that Stephen Lindbergh said that Taiwan, according to their research, were the most disinformation influence country in 10 years in a row. So, and there goes a line from the Lindbergh that democracy dies with lies. And I really appreciate the fact that they're actually paying attention to Taiwan by the fact that Chinese disinformation war in Taiwan is like getting more and more serious about over years. I think the way that Chinese disinformation war on Taiwan, just like Alex said just now, it's quite obvious. Like when you see like all the chatbots or some fake news you see like over the Taiwanese media environment, they're all kind of obvious. Like you can just tell, like you can feel the propaganda or like the.
But if it was obvious, then there wouldn't be a problem, right? Then, then it wouldn't be successful. So we wouldn't be talking about this.
I think because like some NGO and some of the researcher told us it's obvious on purpose. Because like they did it in the obvious way, but like over time, it's not just to influence like Taiwanese voters. When there's an election or when they have a preferred politician they want Taiwanese people to support, it's not like, oh, they want to influence the voters to vote from A to B. It's more about like how they will talk about this propaganda. They will talk about that kind of a certain way of thinking to make sure like you're immersed in this kind of environment. You're listening to all this information every single day on TikTok, on Facebook. So that's a way to make like Taiwanese people get used to this kind of information, and that will slowly turn your way of thinking into the way that Chinese people or Chinese government want you to.
So you're saying that their objective maybe is not so obvious. Is that the difference? It is just bringing Alex back in?
Yeah, so I would definitely agree. The main objective is not swinging elections. Elections are part of the push to, again, muddy the water. It's a technique that was invented by the Soviets in the 70s and 80s called flooding the zone. And basically what they do is they flood the information environment with so much mis and disinformation that people lose track and lose sight of what isn't real. And so they start questioning everything. That's really one of the main goals of China's disinformation efforts. And just to pick up the question you just asked about testbed, again, the Microsoft Threat Analysis Center, I think it was in February, they did an analysis of everything they saw around the Taiwan election this year in 2024. And they called it the first time they'd ever seen a deepfake used to influence an election. On the ground in practice, a realistic looking deepfake.
So tell us what that was.
This one was Lai Ching-te, so the presidential candidate. He was pictured in a video where his words had been switched around, and it made him seem like he was endorsing the opposite side, and it made him seem like he was basically making a mockery of EPP candidate, who is the sort of less pro-China, more sort of Taiwan independence presidential nominee. So there was that, and then there were also a couple of other videos where they basically just spliced an actual promotional video by the DPP, which was the former president, Tsai Ing-wen, and the presidential candidate nominee, Lai Ching-te. They were driving in a car, they're having a conversation. And also they built into this rumor which had been going around that Lai Ching-te had an illegitimate child, just generally putting out information that's not, I don't think many people believe it, but it just contributes to this general sense of distrust and discord in society.
And what would you say it is about autocratic China or their system that enables them to, as you say, sort of flood with this disinformation?
I think that's really the crux of the issue, is because it is a battle between systems. You have democracies, and one of our main values is obviously free speech and openness and this information, the ability for it to flow around freely. Whereas autocracies, they have this closed-off environment, this information environment where it's essentially, to a greater or lesser extent, and a very greater extent in China, controlled by the government, the central government. They clamp down on what you can and cannot say. There's artificial penalties on people who put out information which is counter to their narrative. And so we have this it's an uneven battlefield, right? We can't attack them in the way that they can attack us. They can create narratives and launch attacks on democracies in a way that we just have no fight back against, because the only option would be to lock down our information environments, which doesn't work with our values, or target fake information back against them. But that not only doesn't align with our values, but would also probably not be very effective, because they have these incredibly closed down systems.
Right. And what do you think, Jonah, it is about Taiwan in particular, maybe also China, that has made, as you mentioned, that Taiwan has been the most targeted country in terms of state disinformation for I think it's the past 11 years?
We did interview a lot of interviewees who were who are working at an NGO or like a think tank trying to fight back the Chinese disinformation, or like trying to trace back like where all these information attacks came from. It somehow feels like a lot of them, they don't really have a concrete evidence like to accuse like the certain country who did this attack, or like how all of this information were made from. So in a lot of time, people trying to fight back all this disinformation by like educating our citizens, but like the way or the speed we're trying to tell people that this is wrong, that is fake, is always too slow comparing to the way they generate all the fake news or disinformation. Because like maybe by one click, like all the chatbots, like there would be like tens of thousands chatbots that appear on the Facebook and all the.
So it's the scale and the speed, the two
so
combined.
It doesn't matter how many NGOs we have. Obviously, Taiwan is doing a good job according to a world scale like kind of anti-disinformation campaign. We are on the lead, but like it doesn't matter how fast we do it, because it just can never catch up the speed of AI, deepfake, all these new technology coming up. Because like the way we're trying to educate people is always slower. There's no way we AI the right information to people and like trying to tell people, oh, this is wrong, that is fake, like by a very, very fast speed, because people have to read anyway.
Now, let's talk about some of the campaigns that we saw in broken news. So there was the toilet paper shortage during the pandemic, and there was also the very sad story about the Taiwan representative in Osaka. Why were these so devastating?
We picked those case studies mostly because they felt very real, very tangible. A lot of the time when you're looking at disinformation, it's demographic trends over a very long period of time. So 2% of people think this, or 3% of people think that in a different way. So it's very hard to put on screen and make it cinematic and interesting. These two, they had very real world consequences, a very immediate sort of A and B type of reaction.
Supplies are also starting to disappear from shelves. Nikki Schenfeld has more.
One item that no one really can seem to find right now is toilet paper.
We start with the toilet paper. It's a very contested narrative. And if you watch later in the episodes, you'll realize that every time you look at a case study, the deeper you go into it, the more it starts to unravel, and the more it starts to become questioned, and who started it, where did it come from?
So it's hard to know the truth or reality.
Because inherently these things, they start somewhere on the internet and they start spinning up and spinning up and spinning up.
One item that no one really can seem to find right now is toilet paper.
And by the time they get to the world-changing consequences that they have, it's almost impossible to work it all the way back to the source. And even in a way, it's kind of irrelevant to work it back to the source, because even if you could, it wouldn't really tell you much about the outcome. It wouldn't really help you create justice, because there's so many rumors every day, that 10,000, thousands and thousands of rumors and fake pieces of information. One of them inevitably goes viral, and those are the ones that have the consequences. But the toilet paper thing, yeah, we did it because we wanted to bring people immediately in. We wanted to remind people of something that they personally experienced. And I think most people at the beginning of the pandemic around the world, at least either had personal experience or had heard about this shortage and saw the videos. And again, it's such a very visual thing. The one piece of fake news somewhere spinning up to become this big whirlwind of nobody being able to buy toilet paper in the US and around the world. And then the case with the
Osaka.
Osaka, the diplomat, Su Qicheng, he, again, it's a very, very contested narrative. It's an absolute tragedy. And
let's talk about what actually happened.
Yeah, so there was a typhoon in Japan. It was a massive sort of weather event, and the entire airport in Kansai was locked down, closed down. And there were around 7,000 or 8,000 tourists trapped there. 2,000 were sort of Chinese, mainland Chinese, and then there were several hundred Taiwanese there as well. And people were trapped inside the airport. Now, online, people started talking about these buses that supposedly the Chinese government had managed to command into the airport and rescue the Chinese who were inside. And some people also said that if the Taiwanese said to the bus driver, oh, I'm identify as Chinese, they would be let on, they'd be rescued as well.
这次真真切切地体会到，在这个时候，国家对你的重要性有多大。另外，滞留的旅客中也有一些台湾同胞，询问能不能一起上车。得到的答案是 如果觉得自己是中国人，就能上车。
The whole thing was completely fake, but in Taiwan, it was picked up by the mainstream media, all the chat shows, all the political talk hosts. They basically leapt on it, and it was, I think, 3 or 4 days of just rolling coverage. Because obviously it's a very emotive story. You have Taiwanese trapped in an airport, there's rain, there's wind, it's a very emotive story. And it became, by the evening of the same day that this rumor started spreading online, it was already the biggest sort of topic on Taiwanese TV. People are saying, why can the Chinese rescue their citizens, but we can't rescue ours? And so there was lots of hate and lots of comments online.
In reality, the buses were actually organized by...
There weren't any buses at that point. There were no buses at all. Ultimately, it was all by the Japanese government and the sort of the airport authorities, the people who ran the commercial entity who ran the airport. At that point, when the rumors were spreading, there were no buses at all able to get into the airport.
Nobody was being rescued.
Nobody was being rescued. But yeah, the online hate piled up, and within, I think it was a few days, I can't remember the exact timeline, but the representative took his own life, and the fallout from that was massive.
So it's interesting that you're saying it started, well, we assume, but we have no evidence that it started from Chinese disinformation, but then it was amplified by the Taiwanese themselves. And as you said, it was an incredible, Jonah, example here where, you know, as well as the extreme weather, but it was this choice, isn't it, between your identity or your sovereignty and your safety.
Yeah, I actually...
and making people
we didn't
make
find
that choice.
any like Chinese defamation evidence, but like we did find one evidence. There was one like Taiwanese university student kind of amplifying, like kind of corresponding to the Chinese disinformation, like saying like, oh, there's the Chinese bus like coming over to save us. But actually the student was there, but he didn't actually see the bus. But for some reason, he posted on a PPT, which is an online forum in Taiwan, saying that, oh, there was a Chinese bus came over to pick me up. But I don't know, maybe like this kind of disinformation would just like trigger Taiwanese people to, or maybe Taiwanese media to kind of correspond to whatever the fake news said, because it's like people have their own agenda in like democratic country. We have like our identity, and somehow we just wanted to say something, you know, to agree with the information, even that was fake, but like it corresponds to my identity or correspond to my political bias.
So it's really playing on the divisions, maybe, Alex, within Taiwan society itself.
Yeah, and there was something else about this case which is very interesting. There was a DPP influencer, an online influencer. Is it Slow Young? Is that what she?
Yeah.
And she was ultimately found guilty by a court in Taiwan of spreading misinformation around this event in Kansai. And so, you know, you can clearly see it's not just China. It's a sort of a whole of society response. And that's kind of what the disinformation is trying to trigger, like you say. It's this attempt to play on internal divisions. And Taiwan has a lot of divisions. You know, obviously the main political rift is along identity and where you...
Polarized.
Pro-China or pro-Taiwan.
Pro-China or pro-Taiwan, yeah.
And that's what's
Pro-ROC,
interesting.
yeah.
Right, right. Yeah. What we started off talking about is how Jonah was saying that it's obvious. But then I guess when you get Taiwanese themselves or Americans themselves, when it comes to perhaps the US, that's when it becomes very difficult to see that this is disinformation.
Yeah, exactly, because the entire online ecosystem has become so bubbled. Right? Everyone's in their own little bubbles. We're in our own little worlds of people who agree with us. And that's what the social media age has brought. You know, you have people on Facebook and on Twitter where everyone's in an echo chamber. And so information that's blatantly false, if it plays into your political side, it plays into your narrative, people will sort of can accept it a lot more easily. And what you see is Russian disinformation. If it's not shared by domestic actors in the US, it won't really get very far. So it has to go through channels of people, very, very partisan groups on Facebook and on Twitter. It gets channeled through real American citizens and then kind of gets filtered out into the main population. So it really plays on these divisions.
So then is that the solution, or what we should be, you know, as democracies, targeting ourselves or trying to gain resilience in terms of that stage? Jonah, when you were talking to young people in Taiwan for their series, did you have any idea of how, savvy, alert social media users can actually thwart China's efforts?
I think that's interesting point that people always think, young people, they're, online every single day, so they must be like somehow more informed in a way. But like somehow, when you're more intelligent or more educated in a way, you believe that yourself. I will never be lied. I'll never be deceived because I'm smart. I mean, I've been on the internet for like all these years. I've been reading Reddit posts for like tens of years.
That was the first mistake.
Yeah, how can I be, how can I be wrong? But like,
I have my trusted sources, etc.
Yeah, but like echo chamber, because you're receiving information from the same platform, from the same algorithm every day. So like if your friends are sending you like a reels from their algorithm, and you send some like Instagram reels to your friends, like every time you're seeing the same thing, it just doesn't change. Like if something fake in your algorithm appear, keep like circling within your own ecosystem, so it doesn't go out. So like the fake news or fake information that you believe in, you would refuse to say, oh, I believe in a fake information before, and it's hard to recognize that. And I think people who think they are smart in this kind of sort of a 21st century kind of media environment are actually easier to be lied or to be deceived in a way. Yeah.
So final question, Alex, given you've gone through this process of doing all of this research for the series, how does it feel to have gone through that journey? And also, to what extent do you think knowing, or people perhaps in the US, knowing Taiwan's story and Taiwan's journey itself, 11 years of being, and decades of being, the brunt of this disinformation campaign from China, can Taiwan's story help people across the world to, become more aware and more armed when it comes to disinformation?
Yeah, I think absolutely. I'll start with the first bit. So the process was very long. Disinformation, it's a topic that I didn't know anything about initially. And I've sort of become an expert by accident because you have to go through so many layers of different aspects. Because I think the thing that everybody thinks about is tweets and Facebook posts when they think of disinformation. But in Taiwan, it's so much deeper than that. And if you watch the show, that's kind of the journey we take you on. It starts with the general knowledge of what people generally acknowledge to be the main threat, which is these online disinformation. But as you go forward, it kind of unveils the traditional media, and then these on-the-ground influence groups around religious activity in Taiwan. And also we have two different religions which are heavily infiltrated by China. And then we also talk about essentially this long-term approach which China has taken to undermining the information environment on the ground by co-opting politicians, co-opting media executives, co-opting religious leaders. And so it took us very, very long time to get to the bottom of what the actual story was, because we went into it thinking, oh, it's going to be another sort of the great hack type of documentary where we're just looking at people posting online. But in Taiwan, it's so much deeper than that.
It's like a hybrid of many different tools. Yeah.
And I can get into that if you want, but it'll take me a few minutes. The United Front, okay, we'll skip it. We're probably over time already. But the second part of the question is, I think there is really a lot you can learn from Taiwan. The VDEM report shows it looks very grave. It looks very serious. Taiwan has been the most targeted country for disinformation for 11 years in a row. But what you see is that actually Taiwanese polarization, Taiwanese sort of discourse, and Taiwanese trust in institutions is very high. In fact, it's among the highest of all developed countries. It's far higher than the US, it's far higher than most Western European countries. People in polls consistently express trust in the government, express trust in each other, and polarization does massively increase around elections, but then it kind of levels off again. And I think partly that's because Taiwan has developed a whole series of tactics for resilience. I think the, what's it called?
Gov.0?
Programs like Gov.0, which really bring in diverse voices from society to really discuss issues, they seem to have a really, really good effect on strengthening democracy. And, public awareness campaigns, which Taiwan has run, especially during COVID, was second to none in the world. Getting good information out before the bad proved to be really successful. They called it humor over rumor, which is again just another arrow in the quiver of all these different strategies that Taiwan has developed over a very long period of time, because you have to realize that Taiwan's been under disinformation and information attack for 70 years now. You know, it's a very, very long-term process. And even before democratization, Taiwan, the sort of national government, had a department dedicated to finding ways to combat information attacks. And so there's a whole suite of things that you can look at, and I think other democracies can really, really learn from.
We're going to have to wrap it up now. Thank you so much, Alex and Jonah, for speaking to us today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for having us.
Thank you very much for having us.
Thank you.
Okay.